Today I have the honour of speaking with Professor Gerald Kane. And Jerry is Professor of Information Systems and Faculty Director at the Centre for Entrepreneurship at Boston College. And we will chat today about the technology fallacy, how people are the real key to digital transformation, especially during COVID-19. Hi Jerry, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, Jerry. So first question for you today is, where are you located and what's been keeping you sane over the last few months?
So I am located in Southborough, Massachusetts, which is about 30 minutes west of Boston. And the thing that keeps me sane is just getting outside as much as possible. And we've had a good opportunity to do that lately.
Super. So, Jerry, about your work, you've published over 100 manuscripts and articles on digital disruption. And recently, you were the lead author on a book entitled The Technology Fallacy, How People Are the Real Key to Digital Transformation. And this was published by MIT Press. So congratulations on that. But could you please tell our listeners about your research and what makes you so passionate about what you do?
Well, so the research was a 5-year initiative conducted in conjunction with Deloitte and MIT Sloan Management Review that I led. And over the course of those 5 years, we were able to interview survey 20,000 people globally and interview well over 100 thought leaders. And what's interesting about this topic to me is this concept that technology keeps on moving and changing, and organizations, by definition, change at a much slower pace. And so how do we close that gap between where technology is and is capable of and where organizations are? And the thing that makes me passionate about it is this is something that affects every industry, whether it's healthcare, higher ed, finance, et cetera, et cetera. It touches all aspects of our economy and everybody's daily lives. And so it's just really it's exciting to be investigating such a fast moving topic that has such widespread implications.
Super, really interesting. So next, and I'm sure our listeners will have a lot of questions about that, so please don't forget to submit them. So you're currently, Jerry, working on a follow-up book through MIT Press, and it's tentatively titled The Transformation Myth, Leading Your Organization Through Uncertain Times, that focuses on how companies can adapt to disruptions like COVID-19. So maybe you tell our listeners a bit about this.
Yeah, so the interesting thing was we were planning a follow-up to the technology fallacy, and we had a meeting with MIT Press the third week of March, just as companies locked down. And in that pitch meeting, we said, why don't we investigate what companies are dealing with? Because what we were finding is that many of the lessons of the technology fallacy were being lived out in the post-COVID world as companies were adapting to remote work, et cetera, et cetera. So the book is actually done. We spent 6 months interviewing over 50 executives who were leading their organizations through this challenging time. And it was just a very interesting experience to take the expertise we had, apply it to this emerging situation as we were all going through it. Not a week passed where I didn't say, this is absolutely fascinating, and dear God, what have I gotten myself into? So it was that sort of creative tension that was present through the whole process.
Okay, and I'm sure I have a lot of questions about that myself, but I'm sure our audience do too. So please don't forget to submit questions about that. But my last question in our first 5 minutes of the interview is, you speak of digital and technological disruption, and you firmly focus on people and the organizational side. And we in the Institute for Discovery really think this is truly interdisciplinary research and adds great value. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and I think of interdisciplinary along a number of different axes. So one, subject matter expertise. Digital touches, at least from the business school perspective, every aspect of the organization, whether it's marketing, whether it's HR, whether it's technology, whether it's finances. And so you basically very much need a multidisciplinary approach to deal with it. In fact, one of the findings from our first book was that digitally mature companies are more likely to be organized according to cross-functional teams because, and we specifically asked why, and the CIO of Harley-Davidson said, it's because digital touches everything. If we don't have this interdisciplinary approach, it's not going to work. The other way I feel like I'm interdisciplinary is sort of bringing together the academic and the practitioner. I do think it's important to bring a very rigorous lens to this, but do so in a way that's accessible to the average person, because this is something that's touching all levels of the organization. And one of the biggest things that I work on is helping sort of lower level managers realize that they have a role in these digital transformation. They just can't leave it to the senior leaders, and they need to inspire and encourage them to step up and sort of rethink their jobs in the face of digital change.
Okay, wow, thank you so much. That's a really fascinating research that you do. So we've lots of questions coming in, Jerry. So first question for you. So this is slightly long, but just bear with me. Your book says the most important skill to have in a digitally disrupted landscape is a growth mindset. But Forbes magazine has highlighted the phenomenon of young tech companies chasing growth at the expense of plausible business models. Does this not indicate a serious problem with the growth mindset?
Yes and no. So I think you have, or the question has a slight misunderstanding of how we're using the concept of growth mindset. So growth mindset, in the way we use it, is drawn from the work of the Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck. And what she differentiates is between fixed mindset and growth mindset. In a fixed mindset, you believe success or failure is a result of your own innate capabilities, whereas growth mindset says that success or failure is a result of your hard work. And so what we find when I run into fixed mindset companies, they say, I can't do this. I'm not a technology person. We're a legacy company. It's a result of our sort of baked in fixed characteristics. What we try to do is make digital transformation accessible to all. And that's the growth mindset. In fact, we asked, is your organization going to be in a stronger or a weaker position going forward? And why? The people who believed that their organization was going to be in a stronger position going forward believed that they were going to be able to develop the skills, capabilities, and competencies necessary to thrive in this digital world. And that's what we mean by growth mindset, not at a growth at all cost mindset. So just same word, very different meanings. And so what I go into organizations and do is really try to convince them that all companies can be digital companies. All employees can get the skills they need to thrive in a digital world. And it's something I believe.
Okay, and actually there's a question similar to that that says there is often an assumption that older workers cannot adapt to the new technology as easily as younger workers. How problematic are these sorts of mental barriers for both employers and employees, and how do we overcome them?
Yes, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And in fact, in our data, which is through MIT Press, so there might be some biases in there. For 5 years, we found virtually no significant age effects. This whole idea that technology is the providence of the young, we have zero evidence for that. And in fact, I do think it is possible for workers of all ages to sort of be on board with these digital skills. And because what we find is it's not that they need to be AI developers or social media aficionados, it's they just need to have a functional literacy of what these technologies can do so they can work in this world. And in fact, we found that we asked, to what extent do you want to work for a digitally mature organization? Something like 80% of people said they did, and that was had no effect on age. So just that is one of my drums that I hit is technology is not a young person's game. It is accessible to all.
And actually, it's really interesting. You talked about terminology, but someone who's just come in with a question: how much of a barrier is digital terminology?
Is huge, and that's really one of the things I try to do. And all of my co-authors are Deloitte consultants, and I tease them all the time because they love using fancy jargonistic words. And what that does is it makes people believe that they can't understand it or they can't grasp it. I actually think some of the most fundamental capabilities that are necessary are accessible to all, and it's just finding common sense ways to explain them and not using, going to the latest technological jargon. So I think it's something we can do to make it, there's something we can do that I can do as an educator. And that's really what I try to do.
Okay, so here's a slightly different tack of a question. In addition to large companies, how can we get small businesses to invest in themselves? I see a lot of small local businesses going under because they do not have a website or there is no option to support them online.
Yeah, hopefully that's changing. So one of the things that we're finding is my hope is that one of the silver linings of COVID is that it accelerates digital transformation at companies of all sizes. Because when we're locked out of our traditional ways of doing business, when we're locked out of our traditional ways of interacting, it forces us to be creative. My mother is on Zoom. She is now buying from Amazon for the first time in her life. Not saying that that's a good thing, but it was the technology, the fear of the technology that kept her away from that. And now being forced into it has us try new things, which, are things that we can adopt. So my hope is that COVID is going to make people realize that they need a digital presence, they need digital to survive. And then once they realize they can do it, it's going to change that mindset.
Yeah. So interesting, what was the most surprising thing you found so you said you've interviewed 50 people for your most recent book. What's the most surprising thing you found about digital transformation in times, I suppose, in COVID times?
Yeah, so I would say two things. One, that companies were as successful at it as they have been in such a short period of time, which sort of proves the thesis of our first book. It was always about the people. It was never about the technology that was holding companies back. And now that they've been forced into it, they've been able to transform really remarkably quickly. And I've just been amazed at how many companies have adapted. The second thing that's surprising is the number of executives who see this as an opportunity to do business differently that should not be squandered. That they really see this as a chance to drive change in their organization, to innovate, and the number of instances of people saying, from a career perspective, not from a societal anything like that, that this is a great opportunity to really get stuff done. The third thing I'll tack on that has been very inspiring to me is the number of corporate leaders who have exhibited very admirable leadership and inspiring leadership in all of this, particularly in the US, where I would argue the political leadership has really not risen to the occasion. Corporate leaders have really stepped up. A great example comes from Hilton. So demand is down 90%. They knew they were going to have to lay people off. There's nothing they can do about it. But what they did was they took their hiring system, reverse engineered it, and created partnerships with Amazon and UPS, et cetera, and basically created a job site where Hilton employees could be fast-tracked into these positions of companies that were in demand for workers. So these companies benefited because they got high-skilled workers much more quickly. The employees benefited because they moved into a job, right after being laid off, and Hilton benefited because they come out with a bunch of goodwill from all sorts of people that they're hoping will pay dividends in the future. And just sort of that type of thinking in the midst of the pandemic, to me, was just very inspiring to look at the human side and to keep watching out for their employees and nobody would fault them in a second for just laying people off, but to do so in such a humanitarian way, to me, was very inspiring.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. I had not heard that before. That's wonderful. We've so many questions, Jerry, and we're running out of time, but I'm going to two very quick ones.
Okay.
This is a really quick one, and then I'll ask you a kind of a closer. But what industry, or will all industries have the most digital disruption? I suppose, what industry will have the most digital disruption in the future?
Basically what we've seen is it's touching everything. And you can look to companies that say we are now a technology company, and it spans Walmart, it spans Goldman Sachs, it spans McDonald's, this is touching every industry to some degree. How it touches them differs, of course. But I think as the world becomes more digitized, as people increasingly have powerful mobile computers in their pocket, it's just going to become necessary for companies to do this.
Okay, and we've had a number of questions on this topic, and I'm trying to, I suppose, summarize them in real time. But here, I'll give it a bash. This is kind of a closing question for you. What's the easiest yet most impactful thing that organizations should do as part of a major digital transformation?
Culture, culture, culture. So it's what we found was that digitally mature companies were more likely to have certain cultural characteristics, being risk tolerant, collaborative, agile, etc. And they're more likely to invest in those. And they're using that culture to drive change. I want to throw in one, so that's where I encourage every company to start. It's also why I think we're not going to be in remote work forever, because it's really hard to cultivate culture in a remote environment. So I do think you're going to see companies coming back at least in a hybrid way. I doubt we're all going to go to the office 5 days a week anymore, but I also don't think we're going to be at home Zooming all day anymore. And so finding that hybrid, because that culture is really important and it's really hard to do in virtual space.
And as you say, culture, people are the foundations of culture. That's what I think. Yeah. Okay,
Absolutely.
wow. Fantastic, Jerry. That was really, really, really wonderful to chat to you. And we are unfortunately completely out of time. So sincere apologies to all of you whose questions I didn't get to. But I just want to take this opportunity to say a huge, huge thank you to Jerry. Thank you so much, Professor Gerald Kane. Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
And thank you for such a fascinating discussion today, and for everyone else for joining in. And we run these Zoom for Thought series each Tuesday, so please sign up at zoomforthought.ie, where you can also check out our list of upcoming speakers. And before Christmas, we have a real focus on technology. So thank you so much again, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll see you all next week on Zoom for Thought. Thanks so much again, Jerry. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.